Republican candidates are generally calling for strong action against ISIS, including Jeb Bush. Here now to discuss how he would react as president is former Florida governor and 2016 Republican Party hopeful Jeb Bush. Good morning to you, Governor.
Good morning.
All right, what would you do if you were the boss?
What I would do is to do what I proposed at the Reagan Library 2 months ago, which is to defeat ISIS and to defeat Assad, to bring stability, because it's in our national security interest to do it. That requires a no-fly zone, safe zones. It requires arming directly the Kurdish forces in Iraq. It means re-engaging with the Sunni tribal leaders that were successful in fighting with us side by side with the surge. It means a strategy. We don't have a strategy right now. This president is incrementally getting us into a quagmire without having a strategy to defeat ISIS. This is a threat to Western civilization, a threat to our own country. Right. We need to be merciless in this effort.
A lot of people say, well, you know, America doesn't want to get involved in another Middle East war. But when you see what happened in France and you know their target is here, would you put troops on the ground? Because according to the New York Times today, the president is loath to add troops to the ISIS fight.
Well, we have troops in Iraq, and we have some special operators in Syria.
Advisors.
We don't have a strategy, though, Brian. That's the problem. We don't. I would listen to the military commanders and build a strategy to defeat ISIS.
Sure.
Not by ourselves, but doing it with our allies in the Middle East, and clearly with Europe.
Governor, can you reconcile this equation for me? Less troops, no strategy, a dose of denial, and yet still offering to accept 10,000 Syrian refugees into our land right here. What would you do about that, and how dangerous is that equation for our nation?
That is a bad formula. The formula should be to create safe zones inside of Syria where refugees don't have to imperil themselves to cross waters and actually die, as we've seen. We should be creating safety in Syria, and that requires all in. We have to be all in on this as a leader of the world. The president wants to lead from behind, and that is just not leadership at all. We need to lead. We need to create a strategy. We need to bring people along with us. And the strategy ultimately is to, with force, defeat ISIS, which I know we can do, and then move on.
Does President Bush allow refugees into here? Do you stand with Colonel Allen West, who says no fighting age males between the ages of 16 and 40 should cross into our borders and be accepted here? Specifically, where do you stand on that?
I would look. I think there are people. I've met families, Christian families, that whose loved ones have been or persecuted and in some cases killed, that have escaped Syria. I think we ought to have some compassion for people that are not part of this fight, for sure. And there should be incredible screening. But the ultimate objective is not to take refugees. It's to win this in Syria. That's what the focus ought to be.
Well, Governor, you just mentioned screening. We had on just about 10 minutes ago Rob O'Neill, the guy who killed Osama bin Laden. He says it's time to start profiling. I mean, he said, for the most part, we know who these guys are, who are the troublemakers. They are, for the most part, radicalized, fighting-age Muslim men. Yeah.
No, I think he's totally right. That interview was spot on. This is a threat to Western civilization. It's not a law enforcement exercise, and we should be focused on keeping ourselves safe and making sure that we do that by taking them out in the region.
Right. So should we profile?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. That's what screening is. We should be profiling. Of course we should. This is Islamic terrorism. The Democrats have no clue about this, or they just refuse to call it what it is. These are Islamic terrorists that are trying to take out our country and destroy Western civilization. And if you start with that premise, which I think a great majority of Americans believe, then you have a totally different approach on how you deal with it.
Governor, I want you to hear some of that debate. Only 8.5 million people tuned in compared to 15 for you, or as high as 25 for the Republican debate. So listen to how they describe the threat of radical Islam.
I don't think we're at war with Islam. I don't think we're at war with all Muslims. I think we're at war with jihadists. I think that you can talk about Islamists who clearly are also jihadists.
I don't think the term is what's important. What is important to understand is we have organizations, whether it is ISIS or Al-Qaeda, who do believe we should go back several thousand years. We should make women third-class citizens, that we should allow children to be sexually assaulted, that they are a danger to modern society.
I believe calling it what it is, it's to say radical jihadis. That's to call what it is.
Do you agree with the definitions by those three?
Well, no. This is radical Islamic terrorism, period, over and out. And we should have a strategy to take it out. This president, at the same time that he refuses to have a strategy, is releasing Islamic terrorists from Guantanamo. This makes no sense. This is Alice in Wonderland logic, and we need to have a forceful leader that convinces the world that this is a grave threat, and we can't negotiate with this threat. We have to win.
Would you be negotiating with the Russians, as the president seems to have been doing with Vladimir Putin yesterday? Is there a danger in doing that and dealing the Russians in?
I think there is a danger, because part of the reason why we have such chaos in Syria is that the Russians and the Iranians are propping up the brutal Assad regime that has killed over 200,000 of its own citizens. And look, I think it's always good to talk to people, but we need to be talking with them from a position of strength, not weakness. And that's exactly where we are today as it relates to our role in the Middle East.
Sure.
A position of complete weakness.
Governor, if I could ask you, what is the danger in having a leader perhaps like Hillary Clinton, who in the past, as far back as a year or two ago, saying that we need to empathize with our enemy? We saw the enemy this weekend take the lives of 129. What is a leader like Hillary Clinton, who wants to empathize with the enemy, going to do for our country?
We should have no empathy for our enemies. We should destroy them, plain and simple, which means a strategy in the Middle East to do just that. And I believe the American people are anxious for a leader to create a strategy to go in, settle this, and then move on and get back to fixing the things in our own country that are broken.
All right. Governor Jeb Bush, down in his hometown of Miami, Florida. Governor, thank you very much for joining us on this Monday morning.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you all.
Sir.